Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming here tonight. In the interest of time, I know some folks have to get going, so we'll get this going on time here. My name is Josh Miller. I'm a senior planner with Cedar Corporation. This is Bob Colson, also a senior planner with Cedar Corporation, and we've been hired by the city to do a comprehensive rewrite of their zoning code, sign code, and subdivision ordinance. And part of that process is to update the downtown overlay district regulations, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So this is really the first public engagement effort. And we have Tiffany here with us as city planner. Sorry, she's back here. I think a lot of you know her already, but we got a couple housekeeping things. So there are restrooms. If you go out this room to your right and down the hall, if you need to use a restroom. There are also QR codes at each table, and if you're familiar with those, basically you can scan those with your phone. They have the survey on them. We did send out a community survey link a few weeks ago, and there's a survey that you can fill out related to the downtown overlay district, helping us get feedback if you wanted to provide feedback that way. If you need any help with that, let us know with that. We also have comment sheets. If you do want to leave written comments for us to take with us, what we're going to do at the end is summarize the comments, and we'll be able to provide those to the Plan Commission for their review and understanding what the feedback has been. And then we also provided PowerPoint handouts. If you didn't get one and would like one, just raise your hand and we can provide that for you. So tonight we'll do a brief presentation here, and then we do have a little breakout session. Kind of, Bob and I will each take a table, and we've got maps and other things to talk through if you're interested. But if you do have a question, this is being videotaped. And so if you do have a question, just raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone with you. We want to be able to capture that on audio. So welcome. Thank you for being here. I know it's one of the nicest nights of the year, so it's probably pretty tempting to be elsewhere, but this is a very important topic and important to the downtown of Hudson, so we'll get going. So tonight, we're just, like I said, I kind of got ahead of myself, but we'll do a little bit of a brief overview presentation. Again, tonight is focusing on the downtown overlay district and NR 118, which is the state statutes that regulate the Riverway, the St. Croix Scenic Riverway district. So that's really what our focus is tonight. There will be other engagement efforts for the zoning code, and we did ask if you wanted to put your email and contact information. We'll reach out to you when those engagement efforts are going on, so you're invited to those. So we'll do the overlay district. We'll also review NR 118, so you have an understanding of what that is a little bit. And then we'll do a little breakout sessions. We've got the maps that show the districts that we're talking about. We'll also have a map on the PowerPoint, and then we'll be able to. We've got the narrative for the actual changes to the overlay district, and then other materials. And we do have paper copies of the survey if you're interested. If you're not. Don't want to do it online, want to do it by hand, you can either do it tonight, fill it in, or I think you could drop it off by Tiffany at City Hall, scan it in, and get it back to us so we can tabulate it. As far as introductions, again, I'm Josh Miller, Senior Planner with Cedar Corporation. I've got almost 20 years of planning experience and economic development experience. I've been doing working for Cedar Corporation a little over a year, and I'll let you introduce yourself, Bob.
Yes, good evening. My name is Bob Colson, and I'm also a senior planner at Cedar Corporation, and I have probably 20 years plus experience, probably more devoted to zoning, but planning as well. So between Josh and I, we are the eyes and ears for what's going to happen with this ordinance over the next, 12, 16 months.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, this is really the first step in. You could just take it back to her. This is really the first public engagement effort. We've had meetings with the Plan Commission. We've had some initial discussions. Originally, it was going to be a full comprehensive rewrite of the code, and then in talking to staff and the Plan Commission, they felt that it was important to adopt the downtown overlay district standards first. So there will actually be an initial public hearing and review of this part of the ordinance, and then we'll be adopting the rest of the ordinance later, just because there's an interest to get these things updated sooner rather than later. And so, we'll be working, like as Bob said, in the next 12 to 16 months or so with the city, with the Plan Commission to develop and update do a full rewrite of the zoning code, subdivision ordinance, and sign code. So We're here for a while, happy to be here and excited to work with the community, and excited to see such a good turnout. And we just thank you for your time tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
I'll give you this, Josh, in case we need it. So, yes, again, my name is Bob Colson, and just want to maybe give a little bit of background. What is an overlay district? So, we're talking about the downtown overlay district, and you can see the map, and I'll bring one up here. But it's really, as it says, it's an overlay. It's a regulatory tool that has its own rules and regulations, but it goes on top of the district, and the rules and regulations of the underlying zoning, they still apply, but as do the rules in the overlay district. And so that's just kind of what oops, going the wrong way. So as I said, what's an overlay district? So for those that aren't familiar, the big area with the hatch on it, that's the downtown overlay. And underneath of it, you can see the different zones that are there. And there's also a big blue line that goes through there, which is going to be NR 118, which is, we'll talk about that as we get into it. But just so we know that the overlay is that hatched area, and so there's rules that go with the overlay district. We're going to go briefly over those, but then the underlying zoning also is in play in this area. So as Josh says, we're doing a complete rewrite of the zoning ordinance, and we thought it was important, the city thought it was important to start with the overlay district. And it's not that this is a complete rewrite of the district. We haven't really changed, put a lot of new stuff in here. What we've done, and as you get into it, is we've made it easier to read, organize it a little bit differently. But I think the big thing that you'll find is that there's a shift in terms of how the city will be reviewing and looking at things that come before them in the overlay district. And we're changing it from the perspective of requiring, the applicants to, kind of a prescription, more that they're going to be able to, or have to be able to show that how they fit in the downtown, and there's some standards that are in the ordinance that help to do that. The overlay district is intended to be a mixed use, and so there'll be a strong pedestrian connection to it. Your downtown is very beautiful. There are some very historic buildings, and so a big component of it is going to be to make sure that as new businesses come in, that they recognize the importance of the downtown and the historic qualities. Got to make sure that that they fit next to in the neighborhood of the downtown. So we make sure that the city understands that they can minimize any impacts that are adverse that they may have to the downtown, and they need to be able to contribute to the economic viability of Hudson and specifically the downtown. And there'll be a little bit about retaining the riverfront management characteristics as per NR 118 and. So kind of a 10,000 foot overview. And if you have questions, this is very informal. If you have a question at the time, you can raise your hand and we can stop and answer it, or there will be a time at the end. Yes, ma'am.
So can you tell me what NR 118 is? When I saw your map, I thought it might be the road, but now I don't think so.
NR 118, it's a state statute that deals with the restrictions or the rules that govern the St. Croix Riverway. That's the statutes that say what you can do inside of that district, and we'll speak to that at the end of this. So this ordinance, it's as I said, it's applying strictly to the downtown. As for new construction, restoration, replacement, expansions, modifications, it will apply to franchises and chains equally across the board, but it doesn't apply to interior remodeling. So there are some things that aren't going to be required for you to come to the city, and some things that you will be required to. It's going to be recommended that if there is a project, that they go visit with staff, and staff can help answer questions about this and kind of sort it out if it's a major or minor project, and then kind of sort them that way. The difference between the major and the minor is that the minor is, as it says, there's some minimal information that the city's going to need. But with the major, there's going to be some architectural standards that have to be met, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So the submission requirements, as I said, this piece, both the major and the minors are going to be required for this. A narrative, what's going on, and that narrative is going to then tie back to, the pedestrian connections, the purpose of this district, preservation of historic buildings, the efforts to minimize the impacts, efforts, to increase the economic viability. There may be some other things that are required, you have to submit floor plans, photographs, maybe some building material supplies and other things. But that's why it's important to speak with staff. They're going to help you to kind of navigate through there as to maybe what's going to be needed. If it's decided that it's a major alteration, and then in addition to the narrative, then the applicant is going to be required to speak to so these things. And I'm just going over these in real quickly. There's some descriptions and definitions of what all these mean, but context. How does their project fit the downtown? Scale. How is it in terms of everything else around it? It's visual continuity, balance, and proportion. And it's kind of like so on the top one, we want to make sure that when somebody comes in, that it's going to fit, with the scale, the continuity, the balance, and proportion. So we want something like what's on top, not something like in the middle where it's going to stick out like a sore thumb, and not something like on the bottom where everything else sticks out like a sore thumb. So they're going to need to be able to show that they do fit, and this is how they're going to fit. Other things they'll be talking about in that application is going to be, the vertical patterns of what they're doing, horizontal patterns, unity. Especially if there's multiple buildings, that there's a unifying theme, and color. Color is also important in what's downtown, but as we speak a little bit later, color is going to come into play also with NR 118. They're very sensitive in terms of maybe making sure that things fit, both physically and aesthetically. And materials for the downtown. There's some acceptable materials, and they're listed, but I think, there's going to be some materials that the city does not want downtown, and those are going to be exposed concrete block and some pre-engineered metal building, OSB, mirrored glass. So there are some materials that the city is going to say, no, that's not appropriate in this district. It may be appropriate somewhere else in a different district, but not in the overlay district. They're going to make sure that your downtown, it's pretty unique. There's some nice buildings. There's some history there. There's going to be some effort to make sure that things fit. They don't want to keep them uncluttered. They need to look simple and fit with what's down there. If it's a large expanse, you want to break that up, and so that maybe stepping it back, adding some windows or doors, so it's not one big facade. And we're talking about windows and doors. They need to be similar in size and proportion. These are things that the city is going to be looking at. Size and proportion to what they're proposing, and also maybe to what's next to them. And as much as you can, reuse original openings. Any kind of awnings or canopies need to be consistent with what's there or consistent with what you're proposing. So. Signage, the sign standards that are in there right now, that's going to remain the same. But in addition, the city does have Chapter 202 and 255-17. So all of those sign standards are going to come into play. And so if there's going to be a sign, it does require a permit, and there will be some scrutiny as to maybe size, scale, content, and location of a sign.
You got a question?
Yes, ma'am.
What are those sign standards?
Excuse me?
So they have, per Chapter 202 and 255-17, what are those standards?
Well, we can go to them afterwards, but it talks about the specifics. We can talk about maybe individually, but it talks about the size, the scale, where you can locate it, color. All of those things are in those codes, and so they'll have to apply and conform with whatever standards are in there.
You said there's no changes to that?
At least right now, so currently in the current downtown overlay district, there is a chapter or a section on signs that is remaining until we get through for the next piece. Then we're going to be redoing the sign and move everything to the sign. But for now, the pieces that are in the ordinance that dealing with signage is the same. But that doesn't mean that that's the only piece of signage that you'll have to deal with. There are other codes in the city that you'll have to comply with. Metering and mechanicals, they need to be screened as much as possible. Parking, off-street parking, I know parking is always an issue, but it's going to be off-street parking. There will be some concessions that, maybe you can rent, lease space from somebody else within a certain distance. If you want to have outdoor seating, that's going to require a permit just to make sure that mostly from a safety standpoint. Outdoor storage, dumpsters and stuff, they need to be screened. Loading docks need to be at the rear of the building or on the side of the building. And some setbacks, for them, 70% of a building needs to meet the setback, except on a corner. It's a little bit lax in terms of that. The Plan Commission is going to be, staff and Plan Commission are going to be driving this, and it will be up to the Plan Commission to review all Certificate of Design review applications. There's a timeline in terms of when they have to act on those, so they just can't drag on. And they could consult with outside resources to help them to review those, and those costs would be passed on to the applicant. In case, that the applicant doesn't agree with what the city is saying, there's an appeal process that's in the ordinance, and then there's a fee structure in terms of what it's going to take, just to have this application reviewed. And there's an amendment process, so as Josh said, we're looking to, the big picture is to rewrite the entire ordinance. It's a big document. It's at least a year out. The city wanted to this is a really important aspect. The city wanted to get the downtown overlay district done first, and so we'll be amending that ahead of everything else. And but there will be some cross-referencing once we get finished. All of this, what's happening will be on the next Plan Commission agenda. So if you're so inclined, we'll be presenting this, getting ready for the Plan Commission to give thumbs up, thumbs down, or send it back with some corrections. So your feedback today is important, so that we can at least address what's happening in the downtown. And so this is, if there's additional questions, but just as a reminder, we'll be available at the end of this, at the maps. If we do have questions, I think that I should have said this before, but we need to get a microphone to you so that we can capture your questions. So are there any other questions right now before we move into NR 118? Yes, sir. Just a second. We'll get a microphone to you.
You note that one of the objectives is to review, update St. Croix River Wild and Scenic Riverway and Shoreland Protection Overlay District. What is perceived as being the present problems with that as it is in the code presently? Because right now it just references the NR 181 provisions,
118.
right?
118.
118, yes,
Yes.
excuse me.
So NR 118 is the state statute that says, from a state's perspective, for protecting the St. Croix Riverway, the statute, the standards that go into there. Hudson is deemed a river town, and so there's certain standards that are going to have to be met in order for a river town, and we'll go into those. But that part of this is going through NR 118 and addressing all the components of NR 118 as we go through this process. Is that your question?
My question is what's perceived as being presently not appropriate about 255-18, which simply references the permitted uses will be consistent with what is perceived as being, right now, 255-18 simply references NR 118
Yes.
and NR 115 as being the guidelines by which the city will abide.
Yes, they currently are abiding by NR 118, and so it's not that there's an issue with that, but the statutes just want a little bit more clarity. They're going to want us to spell out NR 118 specifically as it applies, and then there will be some some bridges back to the city's ordinances to make sure that both are compatible. So there isn't, it's not that there's something wrong, it's just that the statutes say that there needs to be an NR 118 component, a little bit more present than a sentence.
Okay, I guess I'm hoping that I will have further understanding later when you get to down the drafts, because right
Yes.
now I don't understand what it is perceived as the problem with the present code, but that's fine.
Fair enough. And if we don't get your question answered, write it down or come see us, and then we'll make sure that we get an answer to it, so. So NR 118, I'm just going to give you maybe what the statutes say by heading, and we'll talk a little bit about it. I do have a copy of NR 118 over on the table. We also have a copy of the downtown overlay with that shows maybe what's going to be coming out, what's going to be going in. But it's the state statutes that apply within the boundaries of the Lower St. Croix National Scenic Riverway. And there's a master plan that goes along with it, and that's what these statutes, NR 118, is driving. There are some definitions in NR 118 about all the terms and things that are in that chapter. But and as I said, it does apply to some. There's some Lower St. Croix Riverway management zones. There's actually 5 of them in the ordinance, and the city of Hudson is considered a river town, and it's a management zone that reflects the character of a small city. It contains a mixture of commercial, park, residential developments that reflect the community's historic character. So in a nutshell, that's the city of Hudson. It can be there's some dense developments, and there's a description of where it's located. And so just so that we understand, the first one is Josh, can you kind of follow along where the blue line? So this is the blue line is NR 118 as it applies to the city of Hudson,
It's not working right now,
Okay.
sorry.
So this
Worked.
blue line right here, that's the line, everything this side of that line is regulated by NR 118. Everything on the other side of the line is just by zoning. So, and here's a blow-up of it so we can see it a little bit better as it relates to the overlay district. Here comes NR 1, the line. Everything that's hatched on this side is going to be regulated by the overlay, by underlying zoning, but also by NR 118. Some permitted uses, single-family, conservancy, forestry, agriculture, public parks, filling and grading. It also allows, and we'll talk about this, that that the city, in this underlying zoning, there's also some permitted uses that the city can have in there as long as it meets the standards of what NR 118 says is fine. Permitted structures, single-family houses, piers, wharves, signs, erosion control, and then also any permitted structures that are in the zoning districts that the city has in its code are also allowed. There are conditional uses that are specific to NR 118, and they're right in there. There are also conditional uses that the city has, and that's where to the gentleman's question that this is where we got to make sure that as we write these two that we tie them back to make sure that they're consistent with each other, that one isn't in conflict with the others, but you will have to meet, and if you're in the area that's regulated by NR 118 and in the overlay district, you'll have to meet the restrictions of the underlying zoning, of the overlay, and of NR 118. And so it can be a little bit complex, but most of the stuff that's already happening is already compliant. It's just that we just need to make sure that the ordinance speaks specifically to NR 118. We talked about conditional uses, and the city can have uses and structures as long as they protect the natural scenic qualities of the St. Croix Riverway, they protect public health and safety, and they prevent erosion and water pollution. Those are the 3 main components of NR 118. That's what the state is most concerned about, are those 3 bullet points. Anything the city is going to do within that district needs to be able to address at least those standards. There's some general provisions in terms of lot size, sign standards, erosion control, on-site sewage, private ones, historic preservation, and filling and grading. So a lot of these things, again, are talked about already in the city code, just making those connections back over to make sure that it also complies with NR 118. Same thing with non-conforming uses and structures. The city has those in its ordinance. NR 118 also has them, and so we just want to make sure that they're compliant. And then there's an administration section to NR 118. It talks about how to adopt it, which means adopting and amending. Talks about conditional uses, variances, and permitting of those. Talks about having some reasonable accommodations for disabled persons. So stairs and lifts are really kind of, there's some really strict regulations in terms of what you can do within the NR 118. They do make some provisions for the disabled reasonable. And then there's an appeal process if you disagree with the decision. And then there's a penalty clause if you don't follow what the state says you should be following. So that is a whirlwind, and I get it, of NR 118. We're not here tonight to go over the details of any of these ordinances in this setting. We'll be happy to take your questions and deal with them. But, so did that kind of in a whirlwind kind of figure out where you wanted or your question?
Well, yes.
Hang on, we need to get the microphone to you. Hang on a
One of the
second.
questions I have is,
Is one of the objectives to allow greater and more intensive development between First Street and Second Street within the overlay district? Using the provisions under the River City aspects of NR 118.
So if I don't know if that's a question or a statement.
It's not a statement, it's a question. I'm
Okay.
asking, is that one of the objectives?
No, I don't think that the objective is higher density development anywhere. That wasn't, the objective is whatever development is coming in, that these are the standards that you have to meet before they can be approved.
Well, I understand that, but the standards that are set are the ones that would have to meet. If the standards are loosened, then more intensive development becomes easier to do. Presently, variances.
We're not reducing the standards.
Okay, that was my question.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, those standards are not being reduced, for that purpose.
So I guess my question, or maybe a little explanation, so which one takes precedence? So like you've got a district of, it's going to be under the coding of 255, but it also falls under NR 118. NR 118 is going to reign. If you have to abide by that, because it's stricter standards, then you have to abide by 255. Is that correct?
Yes. So let me just summarize here, and that may answer your question. So, in the overlay district, as we said, that the overlay has some rules and regulations in terms of what you have to do with the overlay. It's like a clear piece of plastic that sits on top of the existing, and it has rules. But you also have to comply with the rules that are underneath them there. So you can see that there's different zones in here, and so the overlay says, well, you comply with the rules of the overlay, but also the underlying zoning, setbacks, bulk, density, those types of things. NR 118 says, well, yeah, in addition, if you're on this side of that line, then you have to comply with the underlying zoning, you have to comply with the overlay district, and you have to comply with NR 118. And it's not that one trumps the other. It's they are written, or they're going to be written so that you would be able to get a permit based off of complying with all three. Is it going to be as easy as if you're outside of there? No. But it's not that NR 118 is going to kick you out of the game. So, like I said, NR 18 is concerned about erosion, health and safety, and those types of things. So it's a very specific thing. A lot of the stuff that's talked about in NR 118 is already in your code. The city has been complying with NR 118 since it was brought in. So this is not new. It's just that we are addressing the standards in a more detailed manner so that people understand what the standards are. So from a use standpoint, it's not any different than what you're doing right now, except that it's going to be shown in a little more detail.
So
Hang on a sec, let's get a
Right
microphone
here.
to you.
behind you.
And this might be too much information or too detailed at this point. So my understanding under the code of 255, your height restriction is 45 feet? Is that correct? And then NR 118 is 45 and the city's is 35. So when we were looking at the Associated Bank or the Bank Downtown developing, they were looking for a variance based on 45, right? But it should have been 35 because it's within the, or is it, which one
I
reigns?
don't have the history of variances and stuff that applied in the city, but if the let's say that the city's code is 35 and NR 118 says 45, and you want to go to 45, you're going to have to then follow this. The most stringent is what's going to apply, and then you'll have to come before the city and say, can we go up to what NR 118 says? And so, by the fact that one allows doesn't mean that you just get it by. So it all applies.
I can clarify too.
Here, let's get the microphone to you. Hang on a second.
It's just going to the camera.
So the downtown district, also known as B3, it does have a height restriction of 45, not 35 feet. So when you received a notice for the public hearing based on a variance for 45 feet, it was in compliance with both the city's zoning code as well as NR 118. Hope that answers.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Let's get a microphone to you.
I just want to make sure it's really clear to me, because everything you said was that all this stuff is underlying, but it's not. When NR 118 is going to impose stricter standards. End of discussion, correct?
They're already being imposed. They're just not. They're right now in your ordinance. It's a one paragraph thing that says you have to comply with NR 118. So they're already there. You have to comply with them. All this is doing is just listing what NR 118 is saying and making sure that those connections are made.
So you're saying that list already exists. You're not adding additional stringent requirements?
Not adding any additional. That the city is required. Its ordinance says that if you're in that zone, that you must comply with NR 118. What's missing is like, well, what does that mean? So now we're just showing you what NR 118 means. It's always been there, but it's never been written so that you can see it unless you go and read the code, and that's really difficult.
So nothing new has been added, you're telling me? It's just
as far as
codifying
NR 118
what those requirements are?
NR 118 has been in the code for since it came about. It's got to be at least 10, 20 years, and those have been according to the state. Those have been reviewed by the city. It's not new. This is not new stuff that we're talking about. It's just we're showing you what NR 118 says.
So are the downtown certificate of design review, those are not part of NR 118,
No.
right?
Those are
So those are new items to this
The
ordinance.
city currently has that already. They do that.
For major and minor repair and renovation?
We've defined them as major and minor. I think right now that they do them for all, and so yes.
So I guess my question relates more to the minor repairs. In here, it talks about replacement of windows, doors, repainting, re-roofing, all would require building owners to go through this process. And within that process, there's a number of things that are included, such as a narrative, proposed uses, floor plans of the building, existing appearance, proposed appearance, all to replace a roof, or all just to replace a window in a building?
That's where, if you read they're suggested that you speak with staff, and so we can understand the scope and scale. We've tried to lay out, the worst case scenario, things that could be. Is this for everything? No, but that's the scope and scale of what's required for, of a minor. Speaking to staff, if they're saying, no, you don't, if it's only a roof, and maybe in the end, the Plan Commission says maybe this is too much. This hasn't been vetted at the Plan Commission to any degree yet. So this is all draft information. So we're looking for comments to go back, but it's easier for us to say, well, let's start with this big of a picture and take it out, rather than to say, oh, I wish we'd have thought about that, and we need to add it in. So no, not everything is going to require you to do all of those things in there. So if it's just a roof, I don't know why you would need, a lot of those stuff. But that's where it's going to be up to staff, and it's going to be up to the city to say, well, maybe that doesn't even need to be in there yet, so.
So you don't want the comments here, we should direct those to staff?
No, you can absolutely give them here, because what we will do, we will take this, summarize these comments and present them at the next Plan Commission meeting. This is an information gathering session, so if you have comments, suggestions, we want those. The city wants those, and then we'll present those. And then there'll be a discussion at the Plan Commission level. I would suggest that if it's really a comment that you're concerned about, show up at the Plan Commission level and make sure that it gets talked about in the context of maybe how it was presented.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, one of the things that can be abused, if everything is in there, that some future staff member would like to say, this says I can do that, okay? And they can do, so they have a lot more control when you say, here's the broad stuff, we're not going to use it. You might not use it.
Yep.
And the current staff might not use it, but future staff might use it.
Yeah,
So
well,
I think he's got a good point.
Write that comment down. I think that it's important. I mean,
I hope it's
I can't,
on Kim.
I can't change the language tonight, So we're here to say this is a draft of what it's saying. And those comments, absolutely, we would take them to the city and say, what do you think? Hang on a second.
Just in terms of the historical and architectural relevance of downtown, this suggests that any new construction will have to be within the architectural constraints of the historic downtown area? Is that?
Yes.
So that would be a new proposal for this overlay, correct?
This only applies to new stuff. Is that the question?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, it's only for new stuff coming in.
Okay. So, and I noticed things like dumpsters are supposed to be screened in. Do dumpsters that are currently existing, are they grandfathered in from that? Or would that be a new proposal that would change?
If the current ordinance says they should be screened and they aren't screened, then staff, the city could say, yes, they have to be screened. If the current ordinance is silent or doesn't say it, this is not going back in time. This ordinance goes forward, and so it does not go back in time.
Well, I just didn't know whether the overlay is a new recommendation, or is it just restating what currently exists?
Most of it is restating what currently exists, you know.
okay.
I can't say that everything is exactly, but we did not try to go and reinvent what your downtown overlay district is. Try to clarify it, try to make it easier to understand, try to make it easier for staff maybe to talk to the applicants of what it means. That's what this whole overlay or this whole rewrite is intended to do. The ordinance was written back in the 70s and the language was cumbersome, and it's much different today in the way that people think and do business than they did back then. We're really trying to simplify as much, especially in the overlay district, trying to simplify the language, not adding the intent was not to add additional rules, but to build on what we have and as I said in the beginning, to take the shift away from a prescription that says, well, okay, well, if I gave you this, so that's good. No, the shift is you need to prove to the city that you fit, that you're compatible, that the things that are important to the city and in the downtown, that you're going to be able to meet those standards. That's the difference between what you currently have and where it's headed. It puts the onus on the applicant to prove that they understand your downtown and that they fit in your downtown.
Okay.
And so then when we are talking about historic, what is the definition of historic? I could be historic. So what does historic mean? Does that mean the 70s, like the bank used to look like? Or does that mean a Rivertown historic? And how is that defined?
Yeah, so we talked about earlier, that There are some buildings, I don't know, in the downtown that are on the National Register, you know, and so absolutely those, if there are, those will be included. But the city knows that there's a certain rhythm, there's a certain character of the downtown, and from that perspective, that's historic. It may not be on the National Register, but the city doesn't want to lose that type of stuff to what has, you know, to current architecture. If we go back and think about what we talked about with that one sketch, if I can find it, where the important thing of this is this, you know, scale, continuity, balance, and proportion. You know, you know, you can make an argument that, yeah, they've been here a long time, so that's historic, but they're not on the historic register, so they're not. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that, you know, there's a history in downtown Hudson. There's some architecture in downtown Hudson. When something comes in, the city wants them to fit, you know, with everything else around them, and take into context, you know, the architecture of what's there, rather than come in with something that's just totally contemporary. That's what this ordinance, at least in that overlay district, you know, that's the sentiment that there's a lot worth preserving and working towards. That's what this ordinance is trying to protect.
Wasn't the overlay district just rewritten, or invented, actually, written at about 10 years ago? I don't need it. Thanks.
I'm not sure when the city adopted the overlay, but it has been around.
Well, I came down thinking this was going to be fairly informal, and I wanted to ask, well, what the heck is the difference between what was written in 2008 or 9 or whenever that was, and what you're doing now? And I just don't understand the difference.
Yeah.
It was fairly well articulated, I thought, to cover these issues.
Yeah, as I said, some of them were well articulated. Some of them was just really confusing. And so all we're trying to do is just to consolidate, make it easier to read, understand, and implement. So we're not. So that was the emphasis behind the downtown overlay. I mean, for example, I mean, there's a whole page of just these different type of architectural styles, and rather than say, well, what if you forgot one? You know, it's a laundry list. So we've said it's probably more important rather than a laundry list of all these things to say, okay, do you fit one of those? You know, how do you fit the scale, the visual continuity, and the balance proportion? That's, you know, it's trying to get down to simply, you know, to address things from that standpoint rather than say, well, it's Baroque, so I checked it off, I'm in, you know, and there may be an architectural style that wasn't listed in there that probably is important. And so laundry lists are, you know, they're notorious for, you know, for being dated. And so we're just trying to make it easier to understand.
So there aren't really very many big changes, really. I mean, it's really, we're really rewriting that.
The big change again is going from prescriptive, where, well, you already check the box off, to saying,
Yeah.
we fit and this is why we fit.
Yeah.
And Tiffany did inform me that they were rewritten written in 2007, the overlay district.
Okay, the overlay was 07. We have a question up here, Josh?
Sorry.
So I guess my other point that I'd like to make is if we're staying with a historic nature, I'd like to ask that you guys address the signs. I think a lot of our signs are very nice for Second Street, but those neon signs, can you restrict the neon signs from a downtown district so that they're not glaring at you as you come over the bridge?
Like I said, you know, the current standards, because we're adopting this in two pieces, we need to keep the current signage standards the same because we haven't written the new sign language, and so we have to keep what's in there right now. We will be addressing signage as an issue going forward, but with the first adoption, it's what's in the ordinance in terms of signage. That's going to remain because we can't write this in and get adopted and still get the signage piece done. But we will be rewriting the signage stuff as well. So, but make sure that those comments, you know, get in here. So. It is 5:45. I know that there are a couple people that said that they need to leave at 6. We'd like to be able to, if there aren't any more specific questions, we'd like to be able to maybe break out, and Josh would man one station and I'd man the other. If you have some specific questions, we do have the ordinance, and we do have NR 118, and we could probably maybe drill down to and show you in the ordinance, how to answer that question or your question. So one last time before are there any general questions for the group? Well, on behalf of the city, we thank you for showing up, and please, the comments, if there are comments, please get them, make sure that either myself or Josh gets those comments, and we will summarize those and make a presentation of the barometer at this meeting. There's one more tomorrow morning, so, if you're so inclined, we'll be here again tomorrow morning.